The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
We've gathered tonight on this Wednesday of Holy Week to remember part of the story. A part of the story that we don't often give much attention to. But tonight we've gathered to remember Judas' role in moving the story forward. This is what is known as Spy Wednesday, that night when Judas had a choice to make. Each and every one of us have choices we can make on every single day. And when Judas was faced with this choice, he decided to go his way. As we enter into this time of worship, I invite you to think about choices you've encountered, choices you've faced, and how you've made those choices. Because each one of us, as we look at the choices we have before us, we have all sorts of different options we could take. When we come to a choice, we have a fork in the road, and we have to choose how we go on that road.
Stop right here, there's a fork in the road. Don't think you want to get lost. One way leads to a potter's field, the other way leads to a cross. Stop right here, there's a fork in the road. I don't think you want to get lost. One way leads to a potter's field, the other way leads to a cross. Hello, Judas, you poor old fool. I guess you didn't understand. You never did know what the teacher was doing all across the land. So hung up in your own design that you never did stop to see all in the world that he was doing was trying to set you free. So you ratted on Jesus, you took your silver and you thought you were doing great. When you got sorry and turned in your money, well, you found you were a little late. Never understood the wherefores, you never understood the whys. Go long, Judas, down the my way, highway, down to your own demise. Go long, Judas, you're a man on your own. Go long, Judas, you can die all alone. Go long, Judas, cause you never did understand what the teacher was doing in the land. Go long, Judas, you're a man on your own. Oh, long, Judas, you can die all alone. Go long, Judas, move your feet right on down that ego street. Go down to your potter's field. Go, Judas. Die, Judas. Oh, my friend, won't you stop right here? There's a fork in the road. Don't think you want to get lost. One way leads to a potter's field. The other way leads to a cross. Jesus, it's a very hard road that you walk. Some people say they follow you, but it's a little more than talk. The road leads through the wilderness of human need and pain. You put your hands on the broken hearts of men, looked into their dying faces, and you gave them hope again. And gonna let them hurt you, nail you to that tree, and then you rose again to set the prisoners free. And you showed us how to love by the life you lived. You showed us how to die by the death you died. And then you rose again to break the power of sin and death. Open the gates to life everlasting. Open the gates to heaven wide. Oh, my friend, won't you stop right here? There's a fork in the road. Don't think you want to get lost. One way leads to a potter's field. The other way leads to a cross. Beneath the cross of Jesus, I'm gonna take my stand. The shadow of a mighty rock within a weary land. A home within the wilderness, a rest upon the way from the burning of the noontide heat and the burden of the day. Stop right here. There's a fork in the road. So I get a bad rap down the centuries. People sneer when they hear my name. But you gotta know where I'm coming from. I don't want to be covered with shame. I kept hoping every day for this 3 long, long years. One of these days, the time would come, He'd deliver us from our fears. Oh, I loved it on the hillside when He was riding into town. Crowd all gathered round Him, throwing cloaks and palm fronds down. Command them to be silent, the temple lackeys shout. He said, if these folks don't praise me, the very rocks are going to cry out. Priests looked on with anger and realized once again, this Jesus gave them nothing but heartache, grief, and pain. They knew they'd have no peace until they took Him out. All they needed to do was to figure out how that could come about. I thought Him the Messiah. I loved the words He said. I loved His gospel, loved His stories. I loved His heart and His head. I kept on hoping every day that this this would be the day he'd gather an army and rise up tall to throw the Romans away. So what was I to do when day after day and year after year and week after week and month after month he just kept on preaching and teaching and healing? Never rose up, never took the chance, never took the clues. I gave so many clues. Choices. Seems I'm always left with choices. Seems that every time I choose, it only leaves me with another choice to make. Weary, Lord, I get so very weary, and I can't help thinking somehow there must be some better road to take. So I'm gonna push the issue. I'm gonna make sure that he gets to go before the Romans, the governor's mansion. Maybe then his colors will show. So I know what I'm gonna do now. I'll tell them where to find him, and then he'll go in front of Pilate, and his purpose and his power will find him. We'll find him. So you see where I'm coming from? Now you understand. I thought he was the one to cleanse the Romans from this land. How bitter my disappointment. How horrible my grief. The day that I discovered I held a wrong belief.
Our gospel reading for tonight is from Matthew 26, verses 14 through 16. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. And while Judas is busy forming and executing his plan to force the issue to see if in fact Jesus will rise up and become what he imagines him to become, other of the disciples were having their own thoughts. Peter knows it's not long now. He can see the end coming. He can almost envision the marching of the soldiers. And he's wondering, what have I gotten myself into? Well, I saw him first by the sea. I heard him calling, follow me. Simon, my man, you'll be fishing again. This time you'll be going after women and men. He said, leave your nets, boys, and leave your trade. Leave the paltry little plans you made. Come and be what you were born to be. Come along and follow me. He had no cash, no temple authority, no good connections, no security. Had no place he could call his own. Somehow, like a magnet, he kept leading us on. He said, leave your nets, boys, and leave your trade. Leave the paltry little plans you made. Come and be what you were born to be. Come along and follow me. I could never have known on the day by the sea. I could never have known the plans he was making. And if I had known, I might never have gone. The risk was much too high for the taking. For the taking. I saw him first by the sea. Heard him calling, follow me. Simon, my man, you'll be fishing again. This time you'll be going after women and men. He said, leave your nets and leave your trade. Woo, leave the paltry little plans you made. Come and be what you were born to be. Come along. Come along. Oh, come along and follow me.
Matthew 26, 47 to 50. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, suddenly arrived. A large mob with swords and clubs was with him from the chief priests and elders of the people. His betrayer had given them a sign. The one I kiss, he's the one. Arrest him. So immediately he went up to Jesus and said, Greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. Friend, Jesus asked him, why have you come? Then they came up, took hold of Jesus, and arrested him. The word of the Lord.
seated. What an incredible blessing you are, Ken, and have already been. If you enjoyed Leave Your Nets, Boys, and Follow Me, you can find that on his Stories album. And I invite you to visit the merch table in the narthex after the service. This is not a paid advertisement. This is out of the love I have for the ministry that you have had for so many years and the support that I have for what you've done to form my faith. And so I appreciate everything you've been doing for so long. He started his professional ministry just before I was born. I'm a very young man. Spy Wednesday is that first stop after Palm Sunday. And if you're unfamiliar with it, we're going to take a few minutes to explore what Spy Wednesday means and what it can mean for us and our faith journey. Let's pray together. Merciful Maker of all things, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Traditionally, many churches go straight from Palm Sunday right to Maundy Thursday. And as a story, that always troubled me a little bit. I always struggled to find the narrative flow. Ken's a storyteller, and you have to have action to move a story along. There have to be characters, and they have to do things. We go from the hosannas, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, right straight to Maundy Thursday, and something has to happen in between. Going from one moment of praise and waving palm branches to Jesus' arrest just didn't make sense to me. It always felt like something was missing. Then, many years ago, I read about a liturgy for remembering Judas' role in the story and how he pushed this narrative along. And this Holy Week pause just made sense to me because each of us faces a choice each day. We can follow Jesus, or we can follow our own path. We can follow the way of love and light, or we can make our own plans and craft our own version of what God's plan might look like, assuming to ourselves that we can move forward and God will bless what we've done. Our agendas sometimes are not that unlike Judas' agenda. Judas was likely part of the zealot political movement. These revolutionaries wanted a military uprising to kick the Romans out. And they were active throughout the first century. Evidence of their presence is clear in Jesus' teachings. In particular, some scholars think that much of the Sermon on the Mount was a response to the ideology and the mentality of the zealot movement. Think about blessed are the meek, as opposed to blessed are those who have violent uprisings. Blessed are the peacemakers, instead of the insurrectionists of the zealot movement. The Gospels only name one of Jesus' followers who was a part of this party. Mentioned in Luke chapter 6, verse 15, and then again in Acts 1, we have Simon the Zealot, who also makes a wonderful appearance in Jesus Christ Superstar. Gets his own song, according to Tim Rice. Since there wasn't any central or isn't a depository of first century political records, a lot of what we know about these movements within that first century Palestine area has to be reconstructed from what we can gather from Josephus and other first century sources. Some argue that the Zealots as a unified group only came to being at the outset of the Jewish revolt in the year 66. But at that time, they were a coalition of all these groups by the time of the revolt. So when we look back at the New Testament and we try to figure out what was the motivation, what led these people to do what they did, what led Peter to leave his net and follow Jesus, what led Judas to try to move the story along, we can see that all these different factions existed under this umbrella term of zealot. And the various groups shared a few things in common. One, and first and foremost, is they all of these zealot movements wanted to kick the Romans out. And they probably had various ideas on how to do this. But if we look at Judas and what he did and how he behaved and start to see him as falling into that group, we start to see that he may have looked at Jesus, despite having been with him, despite hearing him, and started picturing a militaristic Messiah. Following this line of thinking, if he believed Jesus was the Messiah, then ipso facto, Jesus must be planning a coup. He had to be. He had to be planning something to kick the Romans out. And as they're nearing Passover, and Jerusalem is this powder keg, different groups moving around, different groups raising their voices, and he sees this triumphal entry, he may have thought, it's our time. Look at them. They're cutting down palm branches. They're crying out, Hosanna. They're using these Old Testament King David type phrases. Jesus, why don't you see it? Jesus, how do you not see what I'm seeing? Just maybe needed a little push. Maybe Jesus just needs a nudge to do what we think he's supposed to do. If Judas may have been thinking, if I can get him to the right place, if I can get him into the right position, then he's going to call down fire from heaven, and the Romans won't have any idea what is coming. Hello, Judas, you poor old fool. I guess you never understood. You never did know what the teacher was doing all across the land. Keep in mind a couple of factors. These Gospels were written after Easter. Therefore, they were written with the benefit of hindsight. I don't know if you do this, but many of us clean up our memories a little bit. When we recount stories, my dad is blessed with a rose-colored memory because we've recounted stories before. Do you remember that time I did this? No. You were never a bad kid. Thank you. I'm so glad you remember it that way, Dad. Sometimes we know what we're doing when we're sanitizing our memories, when we're retelling a story, leaving the less desirable parts out. But other times we subconsciously sanitize our own stories. And it's possible the gospel writers, willingly or unwillingly, wittingly or unwittingly, did some of that when recounting their former colleague and friend and member of the trusted inner circle. Judas wouldn't have been made the treasurer if they knew in real time that he was a thief. I can tell you that from a part of church leadership. If we knew someone was a thief, if they were a known pilferer of the offering plate, we would not ask them to be treasurer. By virtue of his position, there was a time in this old land when Judas was right there in the middle. There was a time when he was trusted. There was a time when the other disciples said, give him the purse. It's okay. The thoughts of his theft became much more vibrant after their post-Easter audit. For us having a stop this Holy Week to look at him and look at the way that he played in this story gives us a chance to look at how our own faith mimics his behavior. Spy Wednesday is this time when Judas is this spy acting to betray Jesus, or the time when Judas is taking God's story into his own hands and retelling it in his own words and setting God on the shelf and saying, hang on, Lord, I've got this. We castigate Judas and hold him as the greatest betrayer of all times. Then we walk out of the sanctuary and deny Jesus by our lifestyle. We're so quick to throw stones at Judas and feel relief that at least we're not him. Meanwhile, we forget the time Jesus told the disciples about the Pharisee who prayed, "God, thank you that I'm not like other people." While nearby sat the tax collector praying, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." Jesus used that as a teaching moment, and in that situation, he said, "One of these went home justified, for all who exalt themselves will be humbled, all who humble themselves will be exalted." We judge Judas, yet Jesus said, "Do not judge, so that you may not be judged, for with the judgment you make, you will be judged." Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye when you've got a plank in your own? Our reading from Matthew 26 comes as a continuation of Jesus talking. He had been sharing with his disciples, and the Pharisees were listening in, and he came and shared what we read in Matthew 25, 31 to 46, is one of my favorite passages in Scripture about the sheep and the goats. And Matthew 26 begins while Jesus is still speaking. He tells his disciples what is coming, but they can't hear it. They are not prepared for it. They don't understand it. It's really beyond their capacity to imagine. And the same is true of us. If Jesus appeared today and told us everything God was doing, so often we would hear it and say, "I don't understand. I can't follow. I can't see that big of a picture." We, like the disciples, lack the capacity to fully understand. We might even, like Judas, lack the faith to believe. We might even, like Judas, jump in, interject, and cut Jesus off. No, wait, here's what you should do. Jesus, I hear what you're saying, but this, I think, would work better. And like Judas, we have a choice. We can be stubborn. We can not listen. We can hold fast to our own perception of what should happen, or we can be open to God's judgment and movement. The disciples couldn't have conceived of Easter. And as this week unfolds and reaches its darkest moment on Friday, everyone thought that was it. Even the women who showed up at the tomb on Sunday morning, they came with spices to anoint the body. They weren't expecting Easter either. And Judas, poor old fool, I guess he didn't understand. He never did know what the teacher was doing all across the land. Judas didn't understand, and neither do we. We think we do, but so often we don't. Judas met with the chief priests and said, what sort of a deal will we make? They offered him 30 pieces of silver. And this is the deal with the devil that many of us can rationalize. We think, well, we're doing the right thing. We're doing what God would want me to do. And look, I'm getting something in return. For Judas, he would have thought that he's pushing Jesus to act. By cornering him, Jesus will certainly rise to the occasion and start acting like the Messiah Judas and many others hoped he would be. And for helping God incarnate, he'd even get paid. Jesus isn't who we want him to be sometimes. Our calling is to be who he wants us to be. Jesus doesn't change to fit our image of what he should be or do. God calls us to be transformed into Jesus' likeness. So instead of putting Jesus in the position in which he'll kick out the Romans, Judas gave Jesus just one more opportunity to show how much he loved us. Instead of becoming that mighty militaristic Messiah Judas and the others hoped he would be, Jesus pointed to a path of sacrifice and love for all of humanity. So today, what do we choose? What do we choose? Do we follow our own way, or do we follow Jesus? Do we follow the path that leads to a pot of silver, or the one that leads to a cross? Amen.
God, I got this. I'm good at making plans. I've been a Christian all my life, so I think I understand. I know how to build the kingdom right here in this town. God, just leave it to me, please. I know how to get around. God, some people are just so slow. It seems to take forever. But God, you see, that's not me. I'm very, very clever. I've seen the kingdom built, and I know just what to do. So God, if you don't mind at all, I'll be the best help to you. I can push things in the right direction. I can push things where they need to go. After plans and reflection, don't you see? I know. God, I got this. I'm good at making plans. God, I got this. Do you know I understand? I'll carry on from here till the great work shall be done. God, I got this, 'cause I'm a special one. I wonder if you've ever had a moment in your life when you've had the possibility of two paths to take. I know that I have. One of those moments was when I was recording for a rather significantly large record company. It was the largest Christian recording company at the time, and I had produced an album called Kingdom in the Streets, and all the songs were about social justice concerns, about the plight of the hungry and the plight of the homeless, and at the time the evangelical church's laziness to do anything about those issues. I recorded this album, and we turned it into the company, and I got a summons. I got a summons to come down to the company office. And when I walked in, my producer, whom I dearly, dearly loved with all my heart, and who was totally empathetic to the cause that I was trying to plead in that album, he was sitting in the corner of the office with his head down like this. And I walked in and I sat in the big chair across from the vice president's desk. The vice president said, "Well, it's a beautiful record. It really is. But you know, Ken, justice doesn't sell." So in that moment, I thought, what shall I do? Shall I stay with this record company? They said, now you can do another album. Maybe do an album of hymns revisited. Or maybe do an album, of songs from the, maybe songs about the Holy Spirit. And if I left that company, I'd be out on my own, with nobody doing publicity for me, nobody helping me along in my career, nobody making those phone calls, say, we've got a new artist for you to hear, we've got, none of that would be happening. I'd be kind of out there in the wilderness. Part of me wanted very much to stay with that record company. and maybe just do what's safe. The other part of me, thanks to my spouse, who dared more than I ever could, said, leave them. Go the road less traveled by and see what happens. It's 50 years later, and I'm still here. I wonder if there's a time when you've had to make a choice. What we're going to do for a few moments is to invite you to think of a story about a time when you had to make a choice between two pathways. And in a moment, what's going to happen is that you're going to put up your hand. We're going to get a microphone to you, and as you stand to tell your story, we're going to clap for you, like you're the king or queen of all storytellers. And then you'll tell your story about the choice that you had to make. And then I will do my best to make a song based on your story. So here's our warm-up. Sing after me, please. Two roads diverged in a wood. I took the one less traveled by. Two roads diverged in a wood. And that's made all the difference. Two roads diverged in a wood. Who's my first storyteller? A choice you had to make between two possible paths. Who's going to be brave and dare? And I'm a patient man. A story about a choice you had to make between one path and another. Who will be brave? Who will dare? Lots of stories in this room I can hear.
Got one back here.
All right. Okay. All right. Bravo.
Should be on. Unless they haven't turned it on. I turned it on.
Here you go.
There we go. Yeah, that's better. I had decided with some very bad advice from someone else that I should be an engineer, and I went into engineering, and 2.5 years later it was very obvious that engineering was not for me, and I was very, very close to not being in school any longer because of that decision. And my parents were a little bit disappointed in me. My dad had worked kind of as an engineer, and he thought that's what I should be as well. But my mom said, well, why don't you go and talk to your minister? And so I came to this building and found Dick Myers, and we sat down and talked. And after he'd heard my story, he looked at me and said some of the most profound words I think I'd ever heard. Have you prayed about it? Well, no, I hadn't prayed about it at all. All I'd been was sinking in my own misery about the fact that I was going to flunk out of school and then what? Be a failure. But because of some very good, wonderful circumstances that I didn't realize at the time, I was actually able to transfer to a different major, even though I wasn't supposed to because I was so low in my grade level. And I became a teacher. And I was a math teacher for 36 years. And I got to coach, and I got to work with drama students. And I had lived a dream that I didn't really know was even a dream until I had to make a choice to leave one place and do something different that I didn't think I ever would have done if you'd have told me as a teenager or even a young college student, oh, you're going to be a math teacher, and have the effect that I've had at least several students come back to me afterwards and say, I'm a math teacher because of you.
Oh, the lights are shining bright on the engineering highway. Oh, the lights are shining bright all the way down the road. Oh, the path is broad and wide on the engineering highway. Lights are shining bright, and Daddy says, son, it's all good. So I started the walk down the highway, and one step after another, something began to tell me I possibly might be wrong. I think I'm failing school now, and the lights aren't shining so brightly. And all at once I'm walking in the middle of the night, in the middle of a dark, dark night, slipping on the road, sinking in the quicksand, sinking in the quicksand. What will I do? And that's when you found me, sir. Have you ever prayed about it? That's what you said. Prayed about it. I knew so well the path that I must take. So I prayed. And here was a tiny little road, no more than a side street. A humble teacher, a math teacher, who would ever, not with my skill or my talent, but there it was, this little side street. And now for all these years, and for all those lives, God, I thank you with all my heart. And every day I felt revived. I thought I'd be an engineer. And an engineer I have been, plotting a course for so many lives, a place where they could begin. So God of engineering, how can I thank you enough for that tiny little side street? Maybe at first it seemed too tough, but I know now I was enough. And another story about a choice that you had to make. Who's going to be brave and start the second story?
Back there.
We've got one. We traded mics. No, that's right.
As some of you know, I was a lawyer for 50 years, and after about 25 years of practice, this very wealthy business owner came in to see me, and he was a little rough around the edges, but he had millions and millions of dollars, one of my first really big clients. And he started telling his story, and he sort of shocked me. He used the N-word. So I had to choose right then between keeping the client and letting him know that I didn't allow that. So after a few seconds hesitation, I told him, I don't use that word. I don't allow that word to be used by clients or anybody in my presence. And so if you want me to represent you, you have to state right here and now, you'll never use that word again. And he sort of stared at me as rich people are wont to do. Like, are you kidding me? Are you telling me what to do? But after thinking about it for a second, he said, okay, and he never did again. And sort of fortuitously, a couple of weeks later, another multimillionaire came in and did the same thing, and I told him the same thing, and it was a lot easier the second time because I'd already done it and been successful. So that's the choice I had to make.
One short moment, and I could lose it all. One short moment, and this whole deal could fall. I gotta make a choice now. Shall I make the right call? We could just go on and pretend everything was just fine. We could just go on and pretend that we all could just shine. Or I could say what's in my heart. I could say what's in my mind. All right, brother, I want you to hear me. We're good and well. All right, brother, let me be clear and let me spell what I'm gonna spell. Use that word again, and I'm out of here so fast. I thought that I would lose him. It took a long time for him to decide. Oh, I didn't want to lose him. It'd be so bad for my pride. He finally agreed. And so I stood there by his side. Let's have one more story. One more story about a choice.
We're there.
Two roads diverged.
My wife elbowed me and told me to do this. 54 years ago, I was in my last semester of pre-medical studies at the University of Virginia. I had taken the medical SATs and was getting ready to go for my final interview at the UVA Medical School. But I had come under conviction of something I had denied, and that was that I did not enjoy medicine and found no fulfillment in it at all. And I had decided when I was 9 years old I was going to be a medical doctor. Well, I went to counselors. I took interest tests, ability tests, and everywhere I went, they gave me a different answer. And so I was all the more confused. Finally, I went to my pastor, Sandy Ellis at First Baptist Charlottesville, shared with him my plight, and he said, if I were you, I would just pray and ask God to close the wrong doors, open the right door, and give you clarity. That made sense to me, so that's what I did. 1 week before I was to go to my final interview at the UVA Med School, I was walking down the lawn behind the rotunda toward an early morning class at Cabell Hall. Actually, I was so early there were no other human beings, just the birds and the squirrels and me. It was not audible. It was not visible. But as clearly as I'm talking with you right now, God said to me somewhere in my being, Roy, I want you to be a pastor. It wasn't go into the ministry. It wasn't follow me. It was I want you to be a pastor. Now you've got to realize, when I was a senior in high school, when we were talking about what we were going to do after graduation, I said, well, I know one thing, I will never be a preacher. Because public speaking made me sick. But it was so clear, the next day I called the UVA Medical School and canceled the final interview. Became a pastor. And I found joy and fulfillment, and hopefully along the way touched some others for God through the Spirit.
My son is gonna be a doctor. I could hear my mother say, my son's gonna be a doctor. And you know he's on his way. He's almost at the end now, ready to take his place. My son's gonna be a doctor. Can you see the smile on Mama's face? My son's gonna be a doctor. My daddy told his friends, my son's gonna be a doctor. He'd repeat it time and time again. It will not be long now till he will find his place. Can you see that great big grin there on my daddy's face? Can you imagine how it felt on that most momentous day when somebody said to me, young man, why don't you stop and pray? Everything got turned around then. What to say to mom and dad? Not gonna be a doctor anymore, 'cause doctoring makes me sad. My son's gonna be a preacher. I can hear my mama say, he almost became a doctor, but God stopped him on the way. My son's gonna be a preacher. He's gonna find his place. And their son became a preacher by God's great grace.
Please join me again in giving Ken Miedema a hand. We are going to gather again here tomorrow night and continue our Holy Week journey. Tonight we've looked at Judas and the way that he made a decision, a choice that he had to make. And we've held his question, the decision that he was wrestling with up in light of Christ and in light of the decisions that we've also faced in our lives. And so tonight, I hope that you will leave this time of worship and continue to look at the choices that you have all around you and to think about those choices in the light of the one who leads the path that we follow tonight. We're going to sing together the final verse of Holy Jesus. So let's stand together and sing. Therefore, kind Jesus, since I cannot pay thee, I do adore thee. Go in peace and walk in constant awareness of Christ, just as Jesus walked on this earth in constant awareness of God in heaven. Amen.